Any objection? I think do we need a vote or something to have me serve as started as chair?
Yeah, so you would nominate one of the four of you to take the lead until the vice chair showed up.
Well, I will make a motion that we nominate Commissioner Nan Carroll as our acting chair.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, so I'll go ahead and get the meeting started until Vice Chairman Mason can join us. So we're going to start with an invocation or thought. Commissioner Webb, is he on Zoom or?
Not yet. No.
Okay, would anybody else like to give a prayer? Commissioner Barker?
You want?
Thanks.
I'll do the pledge. I'll do a prayer.
Okay.
Our Father in heaven, we're grateful for the opportunity to be here tonight to meet as a planning commission and with the public of North Ogden City. We're grateful for the opportunity to serve and ask you to bless as we go through the agenda items tonight, that we can do so in a way that will best serve our community and that we can know how to plan for the future of our city. And we say these in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Somebody asking me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Nice. So it's just to start the meeting with the roll call. Commissioner Webb should be joining us on Zoom momentarily. And Vice Chairman Mason, I believe, is just running a little bit late. Chairman Thomas will be excused for tonight. Start out, we've got the minutes consideration for two sets of minutes, the November 2nd and the November 16th Planning Commission meeting minutes. Did everybody have a chance to take a look at those? Is there any issues that we need to? If not, I would entertain a motion to approve those.
I'll make a motion to approve the November 2nd, November 16th, 2022 Planning Commission meeting minutes.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And so those are approved. Are there any ex parte communications or conflict of interest to disclose tonight? I don't see it on there, but
So we've decided to put the opening meeting statement on the back of the agenda. And we've been doing this long enough. And
should we read it out or?
if you would like to, but I think from here going forward, we'll just have that available for folks on there. And if there are any questions, they can be directed to the chair. During the
Okay.
Okay.
If anybody has any objection, we can do that tonight. I mean, we have an audience that's pretty familiar with our procedures. So if you have an agenda, the opening meeting statement, and the parameters of the rules and regs of how the meeting will be conducted will put on the back of the agenda.
We're going to have to refer to the back of the agenda every time. It's a private, I don't know, maybe it's just me, have a review, make them aware that it's 5 minutes.
Yeah.
20 minutes, 25 minutes.
And if we have active public hearings on the meetings.
We should read it. Yeah. Okay. I'm comfortable not reading it tonight with the two members we have. And, do we have a number of members on Zoom?
We have two. They are the applicants.
Okay. All right. So maybe we should read it. So basically, I'm just going to do a couple of highlights for the public comments during meetings. Time is made available for anyone in the audience to address the commission concerning matters pertaining to city business. Before each agenda item begins, city staff will give a report. After the staff report, the applicant will speak first and then be allowed up to 10 minutes. Following the applicant, any other interested person will be allowed to speak for up to 5 minutes. The applicant has final rebuttal time of up to 5 minutes. Any materials that are displayed or referenced, such as pictures or written materials, are part of the record and must be left with the commission. Speakers are required to have signed in at the door and will state their name and city residing before beginning their remarks. If you agree with a previous speaker, state your agreement to avoid repetitious remarks. Speakers shall address the commission from the podium or microphone and shall address all comments to the planning commission. Please silence your phone. Before I turn it over to Vice Chairman Mason, are there any public comments for items that are not on the agenda tonight? You're here for an agenda item, then.
Chris Pulver, North Ogden. I just had a couple of follow-ups from the last one where the communication building, and I just going up that street literally many times a day. Honestly, that's going to be I think a good thing, the way it's going to block that one driveway that has a litany of RVs and cars. So anyway, I just thought I'd mention that. The other thing was the diesel thing. Did they have a containment unit? Was that something that they figured out, if that was something they had to on the generator, whether they had to?
I'm not sure if Kai's received notice back on that, but that was Kai's item, so I haven't. followed up on it.
Just mark. Okay, that was it.
Thank you for that comment. Vice Chairman Mason, would you like to take?
Would you like to continue? I think you're doing a great job.
Can continue. if
Yeah,
you'd
my
like.
apologies to everyone for being late. It's 6 o'clock. It makes it hard to get here from work sometimes,
No worries.
some days.
Well, we can go ahead and I'll go ahead and continue then. Mr. Hess, you had mentioned before the meeting that item number 5, maybe it'd be best to bump that to later on in the agenda, and we can use that time to discuss consent agenda.
Yes.
Okay. I need a motion. Anybody, I'd entertain a motion to move item 5 to after item 6.
I move we invert items 5 and 6 on the agenda.
Second, motion.
Do we need just a voice vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so moved. So item number 6 is consideration and action on an administrative application for amendments to an approved conditional use permit and site plan request for the cottages at North Ogden Senior Living, an assisted living center at approximately 204 East, 1700 North. And the presenter is Mr. Hess, the planning director.
Thank you very much. We do have the applicants online on Zoom for us tonight, so I'll talk about the application, and if you have any questions specific to the project, I direct those to the applicant. This has been in the works for just over a year now, and coming back around. The lodge and the cottages were approved in 2014, and at the time, the property it was zoned commercial, and it was moved over to residential R4 with a development agreement that stipulated the use of the property. So there's a number of layered development agreements over here in this area of the city with Village at Prominence Point. This particular development agreement doesn't have anything specific about the entitlement process moving to council or in regards to architecture, total number of units, landscaping requirements. I mean, all the other pieces that we typically build into FDR development agreements. I think at the time, before the lodge was even, just being conceptualized, it was a concern that we were losing a significant portion of commercial land and that it had to be utilized for this transitional housing use. So as long as that stays the case, then this resides in the Planning Commission hands as an administrative application only. It's also a little different than what we would typically do. And I think there were a few entitlement tracks, and this is kind of a lot of background, but I had to dig through a bunch of files. So I just want to inform you why we're doing it this way. It was originally approved in the R4 zone under a conditional use permit, which was at the time assisted livings were permitted that way. So we have had so many different code changes between 2014 and 2023 that now we have these residential care facilities is probably the closest proxy to the assisted living facility. They are permitted uses. They're no longer conditional use permit uses. And they use a different calculation for the number of square feet permitted per individual user of this type of use. So this application is a little bit of a melding of the current zoning code and what we were under previously, but I think the cleanest way to do this is an amendment to the conditional use permit. And the conditional use permit used a site plan as like its approval vehicle. You know, we looked at a site plan and that's how we based our mitigating of any conditions in the conditional use permit piece. So for that, even though we're well past the year on, you know, they started the lodge and you typically have a year to kick projects off. We're looking at this as an amendment to a conditional use permit. So it's a little bit different. The major amendment that we have here is the applicant had originally 13 structures that surrounded the lodge. There are still 13 structures, but they were a combination of single living unit and duplexes, and they're now all duplexes. They're all single level, single car garage, shared wall construction, essentially the same floor plan. Some of them are shared along the long wall, and some are kind of shaped more like a T or an L with the skinny wall touching the other, depending on the configuration. But they're all essentially the same square footage. The exterior materials are similar to the lodge. They're hardy board materials and other kind of like cementous board materials, so they should fit in and look right at home with Village of Prominence Point. But there's a question about moving from 23 units to 26 in this project. So we started out with the fire department, you know, one, can they provide fire service to the new configuration? There's a small cul-de-sac bowl. It's all private street networks. Our fire marshal has determined that they can provide fire protection for all of the structures, including the new ones that are kind of located south on nearer to 1700. And looking back at some of the original concerns for the single family property owners to the west, this project, the way it's been reconfigured, solves to some degree some of those concerns. There are actually fewer residential structures now on the west side that will interface between the existing single family neighborhood where Coldwater Creek has been kind of channelized and put in the place it is. You have the trail. And then there are fewer structures now on the west side of the lodge. They've sort of been moved, shifted south and east. Using Rob Scott's original calculation, and I also combined it just to see what it would do with the current residential care facilities. It looks at a total amount of square footage and the number of square feet you need for any one person living in that assisted living space, which is 500 square feet. And we can easily accommodate those additional 3 units. That's a really simplistic way of doing the entitlement on the zoning here. Actually, you know, we went back and forth with the applicant on the way to review this, because I think what would have been cleaner is to separate the lodge out as a single use and then take the balance of the acreage around the property and do an R4 calculation. Yes.
Question about that. As I recall, because I was on the planning commission for some of these discussions years ago, it seemed like that, and correct me if I'm wrong, I may have this wrong in my head, okay, but it seemed like the lodge and the approval of that was coupled together with something that was across the street to the south, like a dog park or something like that. Do you guys remember that? There's a little remainder parcel that's almost triangular shaped,
Yeah,
across the street, and it seemed like the two were married together
so
at
that
one point. Yeah, see what he's pointing out there.
John's pointing out that that's the regional detention basin for the entirety of the site of Village of Prominence Point. So all of the surface water collected will, from the lodge, the cottages, as well as the full Village of Prominence Point site, ends up in that detention basin. The dog park was an idea that was put out there as a concept. There was also a concept of like a mountain bike park or some sort of pump track or something in the bottom of that detention basin, but ultimately it's city-owned property that's a detention basin that won't have any requirements for further improvements beyond just the capture and collection stormwater.
Won't have, that's a done deal.
And it'll be landscaped with grass. I think that's the expectation,
Mhm.
but it won't be a big fancy
Okay.
anything.
I know we're not in the discussion portion yet.
No,
I-
that's a good question.
Well, it's just when discussing density, which is always the hot topic here in this area, I felt like there was an amenity coming with the density. And so when we then talk about, hey, yeah, this looks good on paper, but when we talk about the density increasing by a couple of housing units, It's an easier pill to swallow, I think, when there's an amenity brought with it, but I'll leave that for discussion.
Yeah,
It sounds like it's a done deal,
well,
anyway.
it is, and I think that our ability in the administrative application to require them to do an offsite landscaping improvement, one would be hard or restricted. We'd have to show the connection between the impact and what they were gonna do. But also the improvements to that triangular detention basin are actually talked about, solidified in the timing of the development agreement for Village of Prominence Point. So you have a lot of really close proximity land use decisions that have happened here, and I think the timing of how the full improvements happen is going to be messier than we would have hoped. I think originally in 2014, it would have been like the cottage and the lodge, or the lodge and cottages and Village of Prominence Point would have gone vertical almost simultaneously. And now we're 9 years later and we're still waiting for stuff to come out of the ground.
So if that's gonna be retention basin, is that gonna be fenced in?
It already is.
Already
It's
is?
it's already the detention basin now. And it was sized to accommodate the entirety of Village of Prominence Point, so it doesn't have any surface. One of the reasons, Brandon, to your point of why it may not be the best place to do full improvements is right now it doesn't have standing water in it, but when you have 400 apartments go into Village of Prominence Point, all of that surface parking, there will be times in the spring when you'll have standing water.
Agreed. I just hate to see more areas in the city of needless fences around nothing.
Yeah.
That kids can't even kick a ball on.
So there's a few conditions of approval that staff is looking at for this one. These are really holdovers from the original 2014 conditional use permit. Running through those quickly, it'd be complying with the zoning ordinance. There's maybe some question about what that means because we're kind of looking at 2014 zoning ordinance and today's zoning ordinance, but for things like fencing requirements, landscape requirements, our lighting to be downward pointing, those are the items that we're talking about, those basic administrative site plan items. Compliance with the fire marshal letter. There's 2 questions. John has the project here, and we've got 2 trail connection pieces that are critical in this that were built in as part of the cottages. One is the trail that runs north-south from 1700 to Village of Prominence Point needs to connect on the north side up off of their property. Right now that just loops. So that's a handful of feet of asphalt that we'll need to do a little stub connection to. And then on the west side, going between a single family property right there where John's pointing, connecting out to 150 East. So we get a looped trail connection through this project. The majority of the trail already being there, as well as the western 2-rail fence on the west side of the property that's separating Coldwater Creek from the project. And we've had requests about improvements in landscaping on Coldwater Creek on the west side of that existing fence. That's regulated by the Army Corps of Engineers. It's a do not touch zone, basically. So it's going to reside in its natural unimproved state. The rest of the site will be landscaped, kind of everything east of the edge of asphalt on the trail, all the way east to include the rest of the entire site will be landscaped. We do want to see the landscape plan. Any additional fencing that they're showing, they don't show a trash enclosure. It's possible they won't need one, that it'll be just residential garbage cans. And then all the parking lot lighting, if there's additional parking lot lighting needs to be shown, its location, brightness, as well as it needs to be downward.
And why wouldn't a facility this large need a trash enclosure?
I think that's a good question for.
So, I mean, I understand the homes not needing it.
Yeah,
but
and there isn't, there wasn't one in the original lodge construction, and unless it's inside one of their accessory buildings, they've got 2 accessory buildings over there. It's possible that it's in there, but they don't have just a traditional garbage enclosure. And it's been functioning, I guess, right? The other items for the planning commission to consider are whether the findings made in 2014 still stand true today, which is that 7 of these 13 structures have driveways that aren't 20 feet long. Staff doesn't see a huge issue with this. There's plenty of parking at the lodge. I've spoken to multiple people who've had family members over there at the lodge, and right now there's plenty of open parking. Many of the apartments that are in the lodge have parking associated with them, and those folks being in assisted living may not even own a car anymore, so there are available parking stalls. But that leaves the one garage stall for those units as the only place that you can actually park a car that doesn't block the street. So 15 feet deep isn't large enough for a parking space. They're typically 9 by 19. So that's a finding the planning commission has to make, and they'll have to really reconfigure the site significantly to fit those deeper parking driveways. And then the setbacks for this project and for the original 2014 project are similarly reduced, and that's residential unit to residential unit setbacks by the R4 code is 20 feet for the buildings, between buildings, and these are a handful of these locations are 10 feet apart. So there's nothing that's closer than the 2014 approval. There was one there that was 8 feet, but it's not fixing that issue either. So those are the two findings the planning commission has to make, that either meet and or don't add to the mitigated impacts, that would be associated with this project, which is really 10 feet separation is about what the cottages on Village of Providence Point side, just immediately north of this, are. So you're not doing something that you haven't already seen in the area. And from staff's perspective, this is going to eliminate a bunch of impacts that are currently being seen by landscaping the entire site, having landscaping crews coming in and taking care of it, and completing a use that we know is a need in the area. Brandon.
And can I get a clarification, or is one of the driveways proposed 11 feet long? Two of them are. Or one might be 14 feet. Excuse me.
Yeah, we have 2019, 29, 14, 11, 22, 18, 17, 17, 13, and 13. So yes, we do have one very short driveway in the north.
It goes into a garage though?
They do, yeah,
Okay.
they're single, like 10 or 11 by 20, 11 by 21 garages.
I just had a comment about the the last bullet on the recommended conditions of approval, the parking lighting. As I recall, there was a big issue with the lighting several years ago. Several of the residents came, they actually had like drone footage of it, like lit up like the Super Bowl or something over there. So I just wanted to maybe emphasize that maybe staff has to review that or something.
Yeah, and I don't know what the status of the code was in 2014, but our current code is everything needs to be downward facing. So
Right.
it has to be shielded lighting everywhere.
So, okay.
I wish I had that picture to pull up right here, because I actually think it's actually a very good example of dark sky. Yes, it looks like a lot of light, but what you don't see is the neighbor's properties, because all the light is contained.
Oh, okay.
And yes, the neighbors do get a glow. I mean, you can't avoid that, but they don't get direct light.
Okay. I just
if-
remember there were some people here that were very unhappy.
Yeah, I went out there one night to look at it, to just see, and it was funny. Not funny, but as I was walking the trail, a floodlight from one of the neighboring houses kicked on, and it was casting a shadow towards the lodge because of how bright that light was compared to the light.
Oh, don't get me started on floodlights.
Yeah, so anyways, so I think it complies with our ordinance, but
Okay.
the neighbors don't necessarily agree with that.
A lot of things comply with our ordinance that I wouldn't call downward lighting. We've got a neighborhood right behind us that there's a street light. Yeah, you're right next to it. Those are so bright. And they're hundreds of yards from my house and they cast shadows through my window. Like,
We've already
Do we want to talk
complained
about
about
a
it.
neon, 18-foot neon Christmas tree that's still up on January 19th?
Okay, well, why don't, at this time, would we like to hear from the applicant at this time?
I'm not sure do you know if it's Andrew or Mike that's speaking?
I've been speaking with Andrew most recently.
Okay. I made it so Andrew can talk. He would like to.
How's it going? Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
All right. I'm not used to this type of Zoom where it just kicks my mic on. So Scott pretty much said everything that we're looking for. We're myself and Mike. I'm the project manager with Medcore, and myself and Mike are here to answer any questions that you may have for us.
anybody have any questions?
Well, I've asked two questions to Mr. Hess, which were unanswerable, which I would love to hear you address. One was does the existing facility require a dumpster? Someplace where to get trash in and out. That it sounds like it's being handled now.
Before I answer that too, real quick, is there any way that both myself and Mike can be unmuted? He's more experienced with the project. Is that a possibility? Is it just myself?
I've unmuted him, so you both should be able to speak.
Okay.
Although he has to unmute himself still.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep.
We can.
Gotcha. Okay. So for the trash, so I'm Michael Lindo with Medcore. I'm a development manager working with Andrew on this project. So we're responsible for the phase 2 here, the cottages, and we work with our operations team on the assisted living side of things. And looking at the property, it seems that they have a trash compactor, which is pretty typical when you have an assisted living you've got a lot of people. I mean, to your point earlier, we won't have a trash can in front of the houses. We will essentially kind of valet trash, pick that up and put it into the compactor. But between that and any kind of, not necessarily food, but items inside the facility, that the staff is also producing, it saves a lot of space. Otherwise we would fill up dumpsters daily almost. So yes, it's not a traditional dumpster enclosure, but there looks to be a trash compactor for that reason.
Fair enough. I mean,
So the individual cottages, how do they dispose of their trash?
We will have someone most likely, I mean, again, I'm not on the operations side, but we'll pick it up, whether they set it just outside the door or we have someone who comes to help clean. I mean, that's part of what we're looking at in the operations. And typically they'll come in at a designated time and empty the trash cans inside the house, just like they would the units inside the main facility.
Huh.
So the residents don't they don't necessarily need to pack it up themselves per se and take it to the curb. We have staff that assist with that.
so it sounds like, I mean, instead of a traditional dumpster outside, they're taking care of that inside the facility.
Mhm.
I don't
Does the
know.
city pick up that compacted trash? Or do they,
It'd be a commercial hauler.
okay,
I mean, I'm certainly not interested in seeing
okay.
more dumpsters for no reason if it wants to be handled
Yeah.
inside of a building, but
Yeah,
I just want to make sure that we don't have garbage laying around outside.
I think we're just asking these
Yeah.
questions because it's curious.
Right. Well, also, I mean, if that's a
Yeah.
need for them, then,
Mhm.
and we go and approve dwelling units on top of where, something like that should be. But
Well, it looks like, so we're responsible here to decide on the driveways. whether
And the
or not those are
separation.
Long enough,
yeah.
Yeah.
it's-
and the separation.
So still the applicants.
Oh, yeah,
for,
sorry.
yeah. Do you have a question about the driveways? I do.
Go ahead. Well, that's,
Okay.
I wanted, I
Okay,
knew you.
okay. So, and the further question would be on that, and I just want to show my cards there. I have a concern about the length of the driveways of one of your facilities just being 11 feet long and where they're kind of double, I think they're stuck together in an efficient way. And it almost seems like a visitor it doesn't seem like the visitor could park in the driveway, but it seems like they could parallel across two driveways potentially. How do you envision that working?
So typically, so these are independent living, just to be clear. So some of those residents will bring their cars. They don't really drive them. Looking at, independent living as a whole, it's more of, it's kind of, and my grandmother's going through this as well. They like to have their car in case they need to go somewhere, but a lot of times they'll be assisted both by family or staff if they have to go to the doctors or something per se. So to your point, they'll either park them in the garage and leave them there most of the time, or when it comes to these driveways that are a little bit shorter, if you look adjacent across the circular road itself, there's a lot of parking around the assisted living community adjacent to the proposed cottages. So there is
And that
parking
parking could be
close
used
by.
by the residents, visitors?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
God, you have a question?
No, I had on the drive, I had the same question they had.
All right, well, thank you, Andrew and Mike. Commissioners, what are your thoughts on the separation or the length of the driveways?
My overall thoughts when I look at an aerial of this is, I think it actually makes nice use of space. I think it provides a somewhat clustering, like we've talked about in here, pushing homes together and leaving still some lawn or whatever landscaping around it. And I actually really kind of like the headshot they provided here, the glamour shot. But I am concerned that it's an increase in density, because that's always a concern that the residents have echoed. And so that's a concern. I think, fewer dumpsters in the neighborhood is a plus. And so I don't think we need to require any kind of a dumpster if they're taking care of that somehow inside the building.
You know, increase in density kind of, yeah, it's a concern, but you gotta look at the separation between the community around and the walking trails that around. I think it kind of alleviates some of that problem.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's a unique facility, it's a unique piece of property and a unique use.
It's a unique design.
I think overall, I'm in favor of what we're seeing. And I don't hear any, no, did we get all of our public comments out? I don't know if we checked for any other public comments on this.
Oh,
I think we skipped that.
Proper public hearing.
Oh, it's not?
No, it's
Yeah.
not. So public hearings would be legislative items, land use change items, and for the state of Utah, conditional use permits are permitted uses with conditions. And
Okay.
that's why we've moved away from them, is just list out all your conditions and then put it into permitted uses. So the planning commission's ability to say, to just flat out deny it, I think is limited. You could restrict it back to the original approval in
Right.
2014. But you can, because you're under the kind of guise of a conditional use permit, you have some ability to say, yeah, 10 feet does or doesn't impact or create impacts to the surrounding neighborhood. The driveway, the parking will or won't provide impacts to the surrounding neighborhood. The nice thing here is that everything north of 1700 is private streets. We don't plow it, we don't access it. We require a 20-foot wide open emergency services accessibility like ring road, so they can't block it all the time. But for the most part, the city doesn't even turn their cars in and access that.
Yeah. Okay, I didn't see anything. Personally, I don't see anything there that would.
So John, is
stop you from-
anybody on Zoom wanting to make any comments or anything?
Just.
Public,
two
members of the
applicants,
public?
yeah.
Are there any members of the public in the room tonight that'd like to comment on this item?
I'm here with this, but I don't have anything to add.
Okay, thank you.
I'll go ahead and make a motion then that we grant approval. Sorry, I'm just going to shut up. The modifications of the conditional use permit and site plan application subject to the conditions of approval.
I'll second that.
Okay, well, let's take a vote. Commissioner Watson,
Yes.
Commissioner Barker,
Yes.
Commissioner Lunt,
Yes.
Commissioner Webb on, and Commissioner Mason.
Yes.
And I'm a yes, so that approval will pass. Okay. Well, at this time, Mr. Hess, would you like to talk about the consent agenda before we tackle the administrative application for the final plat approval for Majestic Views Town?
Point of clarification, I don't see a consent agenda on our.
Yeah,
No.
this was my failure in reviewing the agenda before that it was posted. So planning commission no longer reviews final plat approvals. So that's a change that we did with our current code amended last spring. So Majestic Views Townhomes, we've been going back and forth on final approval items, improvement drawings. They've got to move a stream. There's geotechnical work. There's a few things that need to be done before Eric Casperson, the city engineer, and I will sign the final plat. I thought it was going to be done for this meeting, so we just wanted to report it back to you. So in the future, what you'll see is consent agenda, and you'll have items on that consent agenda, and it's likely to be administrative site plans, final plat approvals, boundary line adjustments, small subdivisions that we deal with that are under 10 lots that don't rise to the requirement of being in front of the planning commission. So they're really FYI, FYI items. And you can choose as a planning commission to pluck one off of the consent agenda and move it down into the active agenda if you have questions or you want more detail on it. But for consent agenda items, we don't even need to talk through them. There could be 5 or 50 of them on there, and the planning commission can make a single motion to approve. So we'll have those. We just want to be better about bringing those forward to you. We get lots of small lot combinations that happen in the background, and I think by code, technically, we should have been letting you know on the next planning commission meeting that we had a recorded subdivision for a small, small sub. So we'll be better about putting them on, but it's not something we've historically done on planning commission's agenda. So when I emailed our city recorders, it ended up as an administrative item. So we don't even need to discuss it.
What stream goes through there?
What stream?
Stream?
It's not a stream. It's actually a stormwater pipe that picks up
Okay.
Washington Boulevard water and traverses through Paul Farr's property and then back behind Pat Burns and now, Gary Thomas with Majestic.
So I just have a procedural question though. So given that this was listed in our disclosure as an administrative item, does it need approval from us tonight?
You're not the approving land use authority. So
Or not?
So
not on
Okay.
final plats. And
you not taking action will not impact its ability to move forward.
Okay,
So there's no requirement. I mean, technically, you could vote on it since it's on your agenda, but really it's gonna be up to the staff to
Okay.
do the
well,
final.
we didn't table it.
Do we
moved it.
we probably need a vote
I'm just wanting to make sure we're,
to not
Well,
address it? Or?
this discussion is probably enough to just say, hey, it's not something that the group needs to vote on.
Okay.
we move on.
Second that.
We have-
All in favor?
we have our words.
Okay. Well, I guess that one item completes our active agenda. Then, are there any other public comments?
That was strange discussion.
Yeah, it was. There you are. Remarks from planning commissioners?
No, I've just never had anything on the agenda that was,
Like not
Between-
moved,
well,
table?
no, that was regarding the area around 1700 North,
Yeah,
where we didn't have a room full of public.
Yeah.
And,
Usually in the past is loaded.
Mm.
yeah, that was different.
And if we had had any legislative approval or any items that were changing land use, there would have been a notice requirement. But it's an
Okay.
administrative item, so we're administering the code. Even if they had eliminated entirely their first idea, they could have come in under an R4 and the calculation may have looked a little bit different, but they had a permitted use, permitted by zoning for a specific use, and that's this assisted living or.
Well, to me, that was the same spirit of the law of what we gave him in 2014, when I looked at it. I mean,
it's just a different design in a
Yeah.
way.
Oh, actually, design would be better for them overall.
Yeah.
And this is, I had a bunch of conversations about this, and because the development agreement didn't talk about the architecture of them, but we had this conversation that the single units that were there before were significantly larger, like 20% or 25% square footage larger. And they said that either between 2014 and now, or just the market today doesn't bear somebody coming in that assisted living type of living environment and wanting to either pay those inflated rents for the larger space, or they're just not the size of families that need that large of a space. It's 1 or 2 people who are living in these units. So for them and their business model, it makes more sense to streamline the units, make them all more similar and actually slightly smaller. So total square footage for the impervious surface, all the rooftop and everything was almost like a wash between the two. But you just end up with units that they felt like would be more likely to come to market and be viable.
Mhm. Makes sense. Any other comments from planning commissioners? Mr. Hess?
Yeah, just one item, the legislative session kicked off today, and actually, I think it was today proper.
Yeah,
So we're in our 45-day legislative session. I'm going to forward an email that John put together if you'd like to participate in the Legislative Policy Committee meetings by Utah League of Cities and Towns. They run up at the legislature on Mondays, every Monday now through the session, and we'll send you Zoom links to them. They're really interesting to put on in the background. And since they've been doing the hybrid in-person and Zoom meeting, we're seeing, 150 or 200 people across the state who are participating in these, and that's city managers, attorneys, elected officials, as well as planning commission members who are interested in what's happening. And this will be a very interesting session to follow on land use specific items.
That'd be good.
Yeah, so we'll forward you those links. You can register individually for any of them that work for you. And just turn them on in the background and listen. It's really interesting.
Was kind of nice, good for you, more public input.
Yeah, absolutely. That's all I have.
Mr. Cole?
no, just like what Scott was saying, I will say that this session is going to be interesting. One thing also that is just happening in general. And it's not a big deal. It has happened here, but Arizona just passed a new rule. Sorry, Arizona just decided a new lawsuit at their Supreme Court level that affects impact fees in their state. And it just has weird implications on what happens to their neighboring, like, there's no direct thing, but I see a suit following closely after. It was about a sewer district and an upgrade to a sewer plant and who should pay for it. The decision was that existing residents, because it was an upgrade, so there was a capacity upgrade, but then there was a system process upgrade because of EPA standards. And the court said they need to pay for the system upgrade. They don't need to pay for the 30
residents.
more gallons. Yeah, the existing residents. So that'd be you, me, each other with, and a good example is Central Weaver is doing that right now. They're doing a system upgrade and a capacity upgrade. And so how they share that between new growth and existing residents is gonna come in again. It's gonna be a discussion point.
That's interesting, because we just come back from Mesa. My son says down there, they cannot use their gray water in their yard. They get caught using their gray water in their yard, they get fined.
Yeah.
Because they take that water and recycle it back to drinking water.
Question I just remembered, I heard, just chit chat around town that an applicant came to city council about some land use, north of, what was it, east of the Cove or somewhere in there?
The Sears property.
I don't know what it is. Could you brief us on that? So I was curious why that wouldn't come to the planning commission first. Is it just a,
Scott led the discussion, so he'd be good to.
okay,
So that's 75 acres owned by the Sears brothers. The Sears families had that for about 50 years in their possession. It is directly east of the Cove. It connects at Nebo Avenue and Michelle or Nebo and what's the top street? At any rate, it's the furthest northeast corner of the Cove.
it's out of city, is it out of city property?
It's not, it's in city property. It's in the HP3 zone, so it's 2-acre zoning. The reason it went to council first is they're asking for a density increase, and we felt like before you spend money and time and engineering dollars, and you can spend 5 figures easily just preparing an application to come forward to the planning commission. We wanted a thumb in the wind from the council on their willingness to accept an increase in density in this area, and or what would the trade-off need to be for a benefit seen by the city in order to see an increase in density. So they got some, I think, good feedback from the elected officials who ultimately sit in that legislative seat to make that determination. They'll come back with a more refined plan if that's what they want to do, and then you'll see it at planning commission level at a concept. Because this one would come through as a request for a rezone, probably to HP1, or potentially as like its own planned residential unit development that would have a development agreement comes through in the rezone. So
This sounds like one of those times though, when if they've gotten a nod from the city council, when it comes to us, our recommendation isn't always, doesn't hold much water.
Yeah, and in the future, I think it might be good to try to get members of the planning commission at those or have a joint work session on them, so everybody.
Well, I mean, ultimately, that's their call, and they can, even if they came and did the process reverse, the city council has the say on that, but, it just feels like, you know. Yeah,
Circumventing.
And I don't know that they necessarily, they gave them some like, we're open. But I didn't get the impression that there's any one or any two is maybe the better way to say it, that there's definitely not three that are on the same page. It takes three to say yes.
sure.
And this one, I think we are gonna hopefully lean on this group a lot to give some additional insight on what the hill looks like. You know,
So-
they really want like your
Yeah.
feedback on the hillside ordinances and.
Well, the reason this came up in conversation to me was that there was some, and money talks and nothing's on the table, but I was hearing people actually saying they were interested in developing and or purchasing lots in that area if they were whatever acreage, 2 acres or bigger, or 3 acres or bigger or something, but if it gets divided up too small, they wouldn't be interested and they'd take their high-end home thoughts elsewhere. And I'm not saying that needs to be high-end or whatever, but interesting that there is a market for those size of lots. That was a little bit of surprising to me.
So what was the general feeling from the city council? They were in favor of lower density, or they weren't opposed to it, or?
They.
Or higher
yeah, John's
density.
giving what they- I think it sounded like they said, we're probably willing to do something. So on the 75 acres at 2 acres, they can do it's like 30 with the balance of land, about 36 or 37 homes. And I don't want to put a number to it, but it's like, you know, more than 37 and somewhere less than like 100, right? And that would come with benefits of open space preservation or trail amenities. And one thing that was pointed out was that the applicant really pushed on, we'll be preserving these trails, but the council grabbed onto those trails exist anyways. Like you're not really you're preserving them, you're not providing an additional benefit. There's no +1 benefit there.
Well,
All
that
you've done is
development
just-
does lock out the trails though.
Yeah, I mean,
It-
you've
it-
avoided the trails by your development pattern, which staff would have required you to do. Right. They also came forward with maximizing the entire site, and I didn't realize that this was their intention, but the applicant said it afterwards. So the full site, there was something like 160 units on it. I mean, it was significant density increase, but what they were looking at is more like, these are potential areas to put density, and then they would sort of a la carte pull from those in order to get to the total number of units. So it wasn't, we're not going to wall to wall develop this, but we're going to assess all these different zones within it, because there's areas of steeper slope that'll be clustering and areas that are a little flatter that might work better for lots. And then come back with a more refined plan that gets to some specific number that they think is more reasonable. Because it was,
Interesting to see.
yeah, it's like 5 times the density, I mean, significant density.
So since we're just in free conversation, I can give my opinion on this. I mean, I think that most residents of the city, when they look up the mountain, they don't want to see density up on the mountain. They don't want to see a lot of lights and stuff.
Right.
And if I were the city council, I think I would consider increasing the density if I were given in return a park and a trailhead or a horse corral or whatever up there that would offset that. And I don't know what that is. And I'm glad I'm not in their seat, but. Okay, thanks for answering that.
All right. I guess I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion, we adjourn.
Second.